Today we look at a tragedy 40 years in the making. A tale of love gone wrong from the land down under. Endless summer, golden beaches and exotic locations. Australia, the smallest continent and largest country in the world. A perfect blend of modern architecture and natural rugged landscape, it's no wonder tourists flock to the sunny shores. Kangaroos and wallabies roam the outback just as the Great Barrier Reef invites exotic fish to its welcoming coves. Australia boasts a population of more sheep than people. And if cockroaches are not your thing, avoid Brisbane, the hosts of the annual cockroach race. Perpetual sunshine with an air of laid-back luxury can make one forget that even a destination as stunning as Australia has its dark secrets too. One such mystery was the case of Lynette Dawson. She had vanished into thin air. Her disappearance hushed. The last person to see her on the morning of January 9, 1982 was Chris Dawson, her husband. Chris claimed to have dropped her off in the morning at the Mona Vale shopping centre. The mother of two girls was never seen or heard from again. Suspicion thickened the air surrounding Chris. He had not reported her disappearance until February that year. Instead, he'd moved his high school lover, Joanna Curtis, into the family home. Ignoring the whispers, Chris filed for divorce in 1983, stating Lynette left of her own accord. He soon married Joanna and relocated to Queensland from Sydney. When their marriage broke down in 1990, Joanna returned to Sydney with the daughter they shared. She made contact with Lynette's family and police. This did little as police did not take her statements seriously. 15 years later in 1997, the investigation would take a turn when fresh eyes sat down to pore over the cold case file. In 2018, Hedley Thomas's podcast blew the case into motion. Lynette Joy Dawson was a homemaker and childcare worker. Born on May 5, 1948, the mother of two was often described as sweet, caring and overall good-natured. Born and bred in New South Wales, Australia, Lynette met her husband, Chris Dawson in 1965 at a high school function. Both Lynette and Chris were 16 at the time and sparks flew immediately. They married in 1970 and together welcomed two girls. As time went by, the marriage showed significant cracks. Chris was after all a former model and rugby player for the Newtown Jets. His good looks attracted longing stares. On the morning of January 8, 1982, Lynette spoke to her mother, Helena Sims. They'd made arrangements to meet the next day. That was the last time Helena would speak to her daughter. Lynette disappeared like mist in the morning. Chris alleged that he had dropped her off at a shopping center. Concerned about her sudden disappearance, Helena contacted Chris. He told Helena that Lynette wanted some time to herself. Just 2 days later, Chris welcomed Joanne Curtis into the family home. Joanne was a high school senior who often babysat for the Dawsons. She was also his illicit young lover. Chris taught physical education along with his identical twin brother Phil, another former rugby player. Both men were embroiled in a scandal at Cromer High School. They were accused of conducting numerous affairs with underage schoolgirls. In later interviews, Joanne went on to claim that Chris groomed her and slept with her in his own house while Lynette was asleep upstairs. Lynette's whereabouts remained unknown as Chris continued to play house with Joanne. Bowing to pressure, he eventually reported Lynette missing on February 18, 1982. 6 weeks after she was last heard from or seen. 6 weeks after, claiming to have fought over finances and other marital issues, Chris explained his way out of the situation. He even went as far to suggest Lynette had joined a religious organization. In 1983 he went ahead with divorce proceedings and eventually married Joanne. To escape the constant scrutiny of their relationship, Chris sold the Bayview home he shared with Lynette. He, Joanne and the girls moved to Queensland from Sydney. The marriage did not last. In 1990, Joanne finally left Chris and moved back to Sydney with their daughter. She was quick to make contact with Lynette's family and police. Joanne told them a tale of grooming and seduction. Of how Chris used teaching as a method of manipulating young girls. She confessed that Chris invited her to move in, telling her his wife was gone and not coming back. Joanne claimed Chris wanted to hire a hitman a month before Lynette went missing. Her statements did not do much at the time. It did however place a slow-burning target on Chris's head. In 1997 Sergeant Damien Loon took charge of Lynette's missing persons case. He launched a full inquiry into the incident. The only physical evidence was a missing persons file and a piece of paper with Lynette's name written down. Loon did not believe Lynette staged her own disappearance. Her bond to her family was strong. Her two daughters are still too small to fend for themselves. His only option was to place a story in the local paper asking people to come forward with leads. The article worked as tips and leads came flooding in. Following the publishing of the story, Police began excavating the pool and patio area of the Bayview house. Loon said that Joanne Curtis had also made mention of there being dirt around the pool. She added that later on the area was paved over. A pink cardigan was dug up near the pool and sent to the USA for DNA testing. None of the evidence pulled from the DNA matched the missing mother. The new homeowners also told police that Chris had visited the house 3 times after selling the house. They said he would always ask to look in the backyard because it meant a lot to him. Nothing new came of the investigation, but the suspicion around Chris grew. In 2018, the net around Chris tightened. The Teacher's Pet podcast thrust the case of Lynette Dawson into the media spotlight. Produced by awarding journalists Thomas Headley and Slade Gibson, it highlighted undiscovered evidence in the missing person case. Chris was painted as the likely suspect in Lynette's disappearance. The podcast investigated the relationship between Lynette and Chris. It shed light on the arrival of then 16-year-old Joanne Curtis, who later replaced Lynette as Chris's wife. Headley uncovered the mental and emotional abuse suffered by Lynette. She was forced by her circumstances to put up with Chris and his young mistress. Headley addressed the issue of belief in institutions as reliable sources of safety. The very same institutions that failed women like Lynette and Joanna. The 16-part podcast explored the disappearance of Lynette, how no action was taken by the man who said he loved her, and how Chris's reputation as a well-known rugby player allowed him the facade of respectability. Neighbors and friends attested to the reality of life in the Dawson household. A picture of dominance began to form in the listeners' minds. Headley firmly believed that Chris was the most likely suspect regarding Lynette's vanishing act. The fact that he barely reacted or treated her disappearance with much thought was proof enough for him. Based off the new evidence revealed in the podcast, investigators took a deeper look into the life and lies of Chris Dawson. 2 coronial inquests into Chris's involvement in his wife's disappearance proved inconclusive. New South Wales police believe that Chris was responsible for the death of Lynette. Nicholas Cowdery QC threw out both criminal conviction in 2001 and 2003 stating a lack of sufficient evidence. 2018's Teacher's Pet podcast changed the direction of the investigation. NSW police requested a review of evidence. Chris was arrested in December 2018 in Queensland before being extradited to New South Wales to face murder charges. He was granted bail. In June 2019 he pleaded not guilty to Lynette's murder. In February 2020 it was ruled that Chris was to stand trial for the murder of Lynette. Chris applied to have his trial stayed due to the inordinate delay of proceedings and prejudice caused by the media hype surrounding the case. A temporary stay was granted to allow for publicity to fade. Chris though was not going to go unpunished. He was granted an application made for a judge-alone trial by Justice Robert Beach-Jones. The sensation caused by the case and Headley's riveting podcast proved damning for his defense. Chris's trial began on May 9, 2022 lasting 10 weeks and ending on July 11, 2022. Judge Ian Harrison presided over the trial. The case was purely circumstantial with prosecutors arguing Chris's motive was based on wanting an unfettered relationship with Joanna. Defense however agreed that Chris had failed his wife but that she had left and abandoned her of her own free will. They also added that she may have started a new life elsewhere. With arguments closed, deliberation was set for August 30, 2022. Judge Harrison took 5 hours to deliver his verdict. He found that Chris had lied. He lied about his relationship with Joanna, a possible reconciliation with Lynette and the phone he claimed were made between him and the victim. Harrison also rejected the claims of sightings made by witnesses of Lynette. He also rejected the theory of Lynette abandoning her family. Beyond a reasonable doubt, Harrison believed that Chris acted in a conscious and voluntary manner when he murdered Lynette. The aftermath of the trial reopened old wounds. Lynette's family are still left without a body to bury. Her daughters without a chance to say goodbye to their mother properly. And now, a father they loved and trusted awaits sentencing. The verdict may have brought some form of closure. Lynette though will never return. Her daughters Sharon and Chanel were only 2 and 4 years old when she vanished without a trace. Now as fully grown adults with families of their own they must rebuild the broken foundations they were raised upon. They were raised to believe their mother abandoned them for a better life. The man they trusted and knew as their protector, raised them when she didn't want to anymore. He was the only constant in their lives. And now a guilty verdict shatters the illusion they were raised upon. Though justice was served, no one will understand the situation these women face. A mother taken by the father they held on to. Justice served for their mother means losing their father. How does one move on from a tragedy like this? Joanne too is a victim of Chris. She was manipulated by a man she should have trusted. Someone who played with her emotions until she folded. To the world she is the Scarlet Woman. The one who broke apart a family because of lust. The sensation caused by the trial allowed the public to forget her side of the story. Joanne looked to Chris for guidance. She came from a troubled background and turned to the person she felt comfortable with. She was a child herself when she fell into the clutches of a predator. As Joanne delivered her testimony during Chris's trial, one would have heard the pleas of a child who just wanted to be loved. She endured the attention believing that he loved her, not knowing he was just living out a sick fantasy. Joanne too endured the torture of Chris, feeling trapped and used while they had been married. Lynette's family applauded her courage and understood that she was a victim too. Renee Sims, Lynette's sister, said they were incredibly grateful for bringing to light the monster that was Chris Dawson. While the victims left behind recover from the verdict, Chris awaits sentencing at Silverwater Prison. The sentencing could see him serving the remainder of his life behind bars. Life behind bars comes with its own punishment. According to his lawyer, Chris has received several death threats already. He is now seeking special protection from prison guards. Chris said he had been receiving constant threats to his life. Unprovoked attacks within prisons is not unusual. Given Chris's high-profile trial, he would be subjected to greater scrutiny than most others. His lawyer, Greg Walsh, said that Chris has become withdrawn. He worries about his children and his loved ones. Extensive searches of the Bayview property have still not yielded any results. Lynette's body has never been found to date. NSW Homicide Squad Commander, Danny Doherty welcomed the conviction. The investigation though, he said, was not over. They are still determined to find Lynette's body in order to give her family the closure they deserve. Years in the making, this case shook the foundations of a family and broke the trust of those dearest to Chris Dawson. The question remains, how do they recover from a tragedy like this? What are your thoughts on the outcome of the trial? Do you believe Chris is innocent? Is Joanne a victim in your eyes? Share your thoughts and comments with us. And remember to subscribe to receive more mysterious content.